ran out of space, yeah. In the Gold Coast, now Ghana, where the cocoa crop was the largest in the world, there was not one chocolate factory. This same economic status has been perpetuated on the black community in this country. Exploiters come into the ghetto from outside, bleeding dry and living economically dependent on the larger society. As with the missionaries, these exploiters frequently come as the friend of the Negro, pretending to offer worthwhile goods and services when their basic motivation is personal profit and their basic impact is the maintenance of racism. Many of the social welfare agencies, public and private, frequently pretend to offer uplift services. In reality, they end up creating a system which dehumanizes the individual and perpetuates his dependency. Conscious or unconscious, the paternalistic attitude of many of these agencies is no different from that of many missionaries going into Africa. Professor Kenneth Clark described the economic colonization of the dark ghetto as follows. This is from Dark Ghetto by Professor Kenneth Clark. Remember that name, one of the great intellectuals of the last 100 years. Yes. Professor Kenneth Clark described the economic colonization of the dark ghetto as follows. The ghetto feeds upon itself. It does not produce goods or contribute to the prosperity of the city. It has few large businesses. Even though the white community has tried to keep the Negro confined in the ghetto pockets, the white businessman has not stayed out of the ghetto. A ghetto too offers opportunities for profit, and in a competitive society, profit is to be made where it can. In Harlem, there is only one large department store, and that is owned by whites. Negroes own a savings and loan organized association, and one Negro-owned bank has recently been organized. The other banks were branches of white-owned downtown banks. Property, apartment houses, stores, businesses, bars, concessions, and theaters are for the most part owned by persons who live outside the community and take their profits home. When tumult arose in ghetto streets in the summer of 1964, many of the stores broken into and looted belonged to white men. Many of these owners responded to the destruction with bewilderment and anger, for they felt that they had been serving a community that needed them. They did not realize that the residents were not grateful for this service but bitter, as natives often feel towards the functionaries of a colonial power who, in the very act of service, keep the hated structure of oppression intact. Page 27 to 28. It is a stark reality that the black community are becoming more and more economically depressed. In June 1966, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on the deteriorating conditions of black people in this country. In 1948, the jobless rate of non-white males between the ages of 14 and 19 was 7.6%. In 1965, the percentage of unemployment in this age group was 22.6%. The corresponding figures for unemployed white male teenagers were 8%, 8.3% in 1948 and 11.8% in 1965. In the 10-year period from 1955 to 1965, total employment for youth between the ages of 14 and 19 increased from 2,642,000 to 3,612,000. Non-white youth got only 36,000 of those 970,000 new jobs. Wow. Wow. So, if you're black right now, you're alive right now, and you're probably in your 90s, you got grandkids, you still got people around you communicate to. I wonder if you were one of those lucky 36,000 who got one of those new 970,000 jobs in that 10-year span. Much love and respect to you, brothers and sisters. Y'all went through that. Yeah, I did. Like I said, man, this book was written 51 years ago this year. You know what I mean? It was written a year before Dr. King was killed. She was published. So, yeah. Time is of the essence, Black America. And that's what I'm saying. Because reading these numbers right now, you can almost make the correlation decade over decade over decade over decade. Don't let don't let Trump's tweets fool you now. Trump's an idiot and he's a liar. He doesn't breathe without lying. Okay? Alright. Non-white youths got only 36,000 of those 970,000 new jobs. As for adults, the ratio of non-whites to white adults unemployment has remained double. In June 1966, 41% for whites and 8.3% for non-whites. That number was made possible by William A. Price, Economics of the Negro Ghetto, the National Guardian, on September the 3rd of 1966, page 4. Let somebody talk about educational preparation. Let it quickly be added here that unemployment rates in 1965 were higher for non-white high school graduates than for white high school dropouts. Uh-huh. That's why Al Bundy, the shoe salesman with 4 touchdowns in one game from Polk High, can afford to live in a house next to Marcy Rhodes, who makes in today's America will probably make 75 to 85 to 90,000 a year as a bank manager. You know what I mean? And what's his name? Moving on up to the east side. Yeah, that man own a dry cleaner and still had to live in an apartment. Let someone talk about educational preparation. Let it quickly be added here that unemployment rates in 1965 were higher for non-white high school graduates than for white high school dropouts. Furthermore, the median income of a non-white male college graduate in 1960 was $5,020. Actually, $110 less than the earnings of white males with only 1 to 3 years of high school. Wow. So if you were black in 1960 and you happen to have got a college degree, you graduated from college, you made $110 less than a white male with only 1 to 3 years of high school. The percentages are the same, yeah. It might be a different decade. It might be a different millennium. America is America. Like Childish Gambino said, this is America. Dr. Andrew F. Bremer, the Negro former Assistant Secretary of Economic Affairs in the Department of Commerce, further highlights this situation in speaking of expected lifetime earnings. Perhaps the most striking feature is the fact that a non-white man must have between 1 or 3 years of college before he can expect to earn as much as a white man with less than 8 years of schooling over the course of their respective working life. Moreover, it is after completing college and spending at least 1 year in graduate school a non-white man can expect to do about as well as a white person who only completed high school. That is some wild shit. A white man with 4 years of high school education can expect to earn about $253,000 in his lifetime. Now, this is 1960s number now, 50 years ago. So, that number don't, that number don't went up. You know what I mean? A white man with 4 years of high school education can expect to earn about $253,000 in his lifetime. A black man with 5 years or more of college can expect to earn $246,000 in his lifetime. Dr. Bremer is presently a member of the Federal Reserve Board, and many people will point to his new position as an indication of the progress of Negroes. In Chapter 2, we shall discuss the absurdity of such conclusions. Again, as in the African colonies, the black community is sapped senseless of what economic resources it does have. Through the exploitative system of credit, people pay a dollar down, a dollar a week, literally for years. Interest rates are astronomical, and the merchandise of relatively poor quality in the first place is long since worn out before the final payment. Professor David Kaplowitz of Columbia University has commented in his book The Poor Pay More. The high markup on low quality goods is thus a major device used by merchants to protect themselves against the risk of their credit business. Page 18. Many of the ghetto citizens, because of unsteady employment and low incomes, cannot obtain credit from more legitimate business. Thus, they must do without important items or end up being exploited. They are lured into the stores by attractive display, advertising displays hawking, for example, 3 rooms of furniture for only $199. Once inside, the unsuspecting customer is persuaded to buy lesser furniture at a more expensive price, or he is told that the advertised item was temporarily out of stock and is shown other goods. More frequently than not, of course, all the items are overpriced. The exploitative merchant relies as much on threat as he does on legal action to guarantee payment. Garnishment of wages is not particularly beneficial to the merchant, although certainly used because the employer will frequently fire an employee rather than be subjected to the burden of extra bookkeeping. And once the buyer is fired, all payments stop, but the merchants can hold the threat of garnishment over the customer's head. Repossession is another threat, again not particularly beneficial to the merchant. He knows the poor quality of his goods in the first place, and there is little resale value in such goods which have probably already received substantial use. In addition, both the methods of garnishment and the repossession gives the merchants a bad business image in the community. It is better business practice to raise the prices 2 to 300%, get what he can, dogging the customer for what weekly payments, dogging the customer for their weekly payments and still realize a sizable profit. At the same time, the merchant can protect his image as a considerate, understanding fellow. The merchant has special ways of victimizing public welfare recipients. They are not supposed to buy on credit. Installments Installments payments are not provided for in the budget. Thus, a merchant can threaten to tell the caseworker if a recipient who isn't meeting his payments does not come in and put down something, if only a couple of dollars. Another example, in November 1966, MEND, MEND, stands for Massive Economic Neighborhood Development, a community action anti-poverty agency in New York City, documented the fact that some merchants raised their prices on the days their welfare recipients received their checks. Canned goods and other items were priced as much as 10 cents more on those specific days. Out of his substandard income, the black man pays exorbitant prices for cheap goods. He, he must then pay more for his housing than white. Whitney Young Jr. of the Urban League writes in his book, To Be Equal, quote, most of Chicago's 838,000 Negroes live in the ghetto and pay about $20 more per month for housing than their white counterparts in the city. Pages 144 to 145. Close quote. Black people also have a much more difficult time securing a mortgage. You think? Black people also have a much more difficult time securing a mortgage. They must resort to real estate speculators who charge interest rates up to 10%, whereas an FHA loan will carry only a 6% interest rate. As for loans to go into business, we find the same pattern as among Africans, who were prohibited or discouraged from starting commercial enterprises. Quote, the white power structure, says Dr. Clark in Dark Ghetto, has collaborated in the economic serfdom of Negroes by its reluctance to give loans and insurance to Negro business. Pages 27 to 28. Close quote. The Small Business Administration, for example, in the 10-year period prior to 1964, made only 7 loans to black people. Wow. So from 1954, when Brown versus Board of Education was was made constitutional, became law by the Supreme Court, was made constitutional by the Supreme Court. From 1954 to 1964, the Small Business Administration. 7 though? Come on, man. Nah, that's a lie. Sorry, man. That number is just crazy, you know what I mean? That number is just wild. I don't know. Okay. This is why the society does nothing meaningful about institutional racism. Because the black community has been the creation of and dominated by a combination of oppressive forces and special interests in the white community. The groups which have access to the necessary resources and the ability to effect change benefit politically and economically from the continued subordinate status of the black community. This is not to say that every single white American consciously oppresses black people. He does not need to. Institutional racism has been maintained deliberately by the power structure and through indifference, inertia, and lack courage on the part of white masses as well as petty officials. Whenever black demands for change become loud and strong, indifference is replaced by active opposition based on fear and self-interest. The line between purposeful suppression and indifference blurs. One way or another, Most whites participate in economic colonialism. Indeed, the colonial white power structure has been a most formidable foe. It has perpetuated a vicious circle, the poverty circle, in which the black communities are denied good jobs and therefore stuck with a low income and therefore unable to obtain a good education with which to obtain good jobs. We shall discuss this in details in chapter 7. They cannot qualify for credit at most reputable places. Then they resort to unethical merchants who take advantage of them by charging higher prices for inferior goods. They end up having less funds to buy in bulk, thus unable to reduce overall costs. They remain trapped. In the face of such realities, it becomes ludicrous. Ludicrous. Sorry, now let me stop. In the face of such realities, it becomes ludicrous to condemn black people for not showing more initiative. Quote, black people are not in a depressed condition because of some defects in their character. The colonial power structure clamped the boots of oppression on the neck of the black people and then ironically said, quote, they are now ready for freedom, close quote. Left solely to the goodwill of the oppressor, the oppressed will never be ready. That is a good quote. Left solely to the goodwill of the oppressor, the oppressed will never be ready. I bet you Donald Trump doesn't know what that means. I guarantee you he doesn't know what that means. I put my next paycheck on it, he doesn't know what that means. My paycheck after taxes, I actually pay taxes, bro. After taxes, probably like, my next one, probably like, maybe like 8 something, almost 9. She depends, you know what I mean? And I know overtime on that check, so straight 80. Almost 80. But still, long story short though, I bet my next paycheck on that. Trump doesn't know what that line is. Like, that specific line. I'm going to say it again I'm not going to spell out the whole sentence, I could, but that's really dumbing it down for him, you know what I mean? He's stupid, I don't think he's that dumb. But it says, left solely to the goodwill of the oppressor, the oppressed will never be ready. Left solely to the goodwill of the oppressor. See, now me telling him that he can't understand it make me almost forget that I understood it in the first place. If you felt that in the last 3 years, you've been suffering through TRPTSD. But it says the colonial power structure clamped the boots of oppression on the neck of the black people and then ironically said, quote, they are now ready for freedom, close quote. Left solely to the goodwill of the oppressor, the oppressed will never be ready. We didn't vote. Your president is stupid. If you read a book a year, in that year you're smarter than he is. You're probably smarter than he is right now, but if you read a book a year, you're smarter than he is. Even if you read a picture book. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Back to the book. And no one accepts blame. There is no white power structure doing it to them. And they are in that condition because they're lazy and don't want to work. And this is not colonialism. This is the land of opportunity and the home of the free, and the people should not become alienated. But people do become alienated. The operation of political and economic colonialism in this country has had social repercussions which date back to slavery, but did not by any means end with the Emancipation Proclamation. Perhaps the most vicious result of colonialism in Africa and this country was that it purposefully, maliciously, and with reckless abandon relegated the black man to a subordinated, inferior status in the society. Trying to tell you, yo, the Arabs invented slavery. You know what I mean? Like, as a Muslim, I get that. That's why I say Trump supporters, white Americans think that I'm gonna get the biggest backlash from them. I'm gonna get the biggest backlash from my family and from Sierra Leoneans and from Muslims. Fula boys don't do shit like this. You know what I mean? Americans don't get this joke. Sierra Leoneans and Africans will, especially Sierra Leoneans. My family will. Fula boys don't do shit like this. Fula boys don't rock the boat with shit like this. We get good jobs and have families and shit. We get an education and shit because we're smart as fuck. They don't watch me now that my last here. What's up, Salon? What's up, Freetown? I'm sorry. I just had an African booty scratching moment. But people do become alienated. The operation of political and economic colonialism in this country has had social repercussions which date back to slavery, but did not by any means end with the Emancipation Proclamation. Perhaps the most vicious result of colonialism in Africa and this country was that it purposefully, maliciously, and with reckless abandon relegated the black man to a subordinated, inferior status in the society. The individual was considered and treated as a lowly animal, not to be housed properly or given adequate medical services, and by no means a decent education. In Chapter 7, we will discuss the specific effects of colonialism on the education, housing, and health of black people. Here we shall concentrate on the human and psychological results of social colonialism. First, as it affected white attitudes towards blacks, and then the attitudes of black people towards themselves. Ethnic self-hate. Alright, that phrase was always in my mind in some form, but it was never put together in my mind like that. I did not just read the phrase ethnic self-hate in this book. That just popped in my head after I read then the attitude of black people towards themselves, which is ethnic self-hate. I read that in Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. I'm gonna say right now, I'm gonna advise parental discretion when I get to that part, cause that brother went into some shit, but I liked what he said. I didn't like most of the things he said, but I liked some of the things he said. He predicted Donald Trump as America's Hitler. He did. I'm proposing it here first. He did. Eldridge Cleaver in 1963 it was, or 65, 66. So I get to that. Now we get to that. As we have already noted, slaves were brought to this land for the good of white masses, not for the purpose of saving or civilizing the blacks. In From Slavery to Freedom, Professor John Hope Franklin writes, when the countries of Europe undertook to develop the New World, they were interested primarily in the exploitation of America's natural resources. Labor was obviously necessary, and the cheaper the better. The Arabs invented and started slavery. The white man just perfected it on the slaves of blacks. Period. So the pit of misery, dilly dilly. Indians would have been a natural solution. but they were too susceptible to diseases carried by Europeans, and they would not conform to the rigid discipline of the plantation system. Poor whites of Europe were tried but proved unsatisfactory. They were only indentured servants, brought over to serve for a limited time. Many refused to complete their contracts and ran away. With their white skins, they assimilated easily enough into the society. But black Africans were different. They proved to be the white man's economic salvation, Franklin concludes. Because of their color, Negroes would be easily apprehended. Negroes could be purchased outright and the master's labor supply would not be in a state of constant fluctuation. Negroes from a pagan land and without exposure to the ethical ideals of Christianity could be handled with more rigid methods of discipline and could be morally and spiritually degraded for the sake of stability on the plantation. In the long run, Negro slaves were actually cheaper. In a period when economic considerations were so vital, this was especially important. Negro slavery then became a fixed institution, a solution to one of the most difficult problems that arose in the New World. With the supply of Negroes apparently inexhaustible, there will be no more worries about labor. European countries will look back with gratitude to the first of their nationals who explored the coast of Africa and brought back gold to Europe. It was the key to the solution of one of America's most pressing problems. Page 49 of From Slavery to Freedom. That's an awesome book. That is, I read it in high school. I read it in high school because the teacher made me feel like I was stupid. So I read it. I don't remember much of it, but that was a good book. That was a good book. The fact of slavery had to have profound impact on the subsequent attitudes of the larger society toward the black man. The fact of slavery helped to fix this sense of superior group position. George Henry Taney in the Dred Scott decision of 1857, 1857, 1957, 57, 67, so 161 years? 161 years ago? Okay. Chief Justice Taney in the Dred Scott decision of 1857, 161 years ago, stated that they, black people, had no rights where the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. The emancipation of the slaves by legal acts could certainly not erase such notions from the minds of racists. They believe in their superior status, not in paper documents, and that belief has persisted. Trump's election. They believe in their superior status. Trump's election. And I'm gonna stop and emphasize here. I'm talking about the bigoted 44, 45, 47% or so of white Americans. I'm not talking about the whole kid and caboodle, you know what I mean? I'm not talking about I'm not calling nobody no basket off, no deplorables, you know what I mean? Now you can tell a racist where you see one, you know what I mean? Like, so, I'm just saying, I'm not coming for all. If you like how Greg Popovich feels about race relations in America, I will kumbaya with you all day, all night. The emancipation of the slaves by legal acts could certainly not erase such notions from the minds of racists. They believe in their superior status, not in paper documents, and that belief has persisted. This was written in 1967. Right now, today, that is still true today. That belief has persisted. If it hadn't persisted, Tea Party movement would have been necessary. If he hadn't persisted, Donald Trump would have had reason to come out of his dumbass mouth and say he's gonna make America great again. And white Americans who were enjoying more of the benefits of everything that was going on in Obama's 8 years anyway, wouldn't have come out in droves and be like, okay, yeah, I buy what you're saying. They wouldn't be falling for the lies. They would see the lies for what they were, lies. But they chose, like, yeah, that part right there. And that belief has persisted. When some people compared the black American to other migrant groups in this country, they overlooked the fact that slavery was peculiar to the blacks. No other minority group in this country was ever treated as legal property. In Richard Rustin's The Color of Law, right? A forgotten history of how our government segregated America. So in the back of it, he has like a little frequently asked questions section, which was awesome. Yes, he had a frequently asked questions that I guess people ask. Let me see where this question is. All right, this is not the appendix. It says frequent appendix frequently asked questions. It's on page 219 of The Color of Law: A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America by Richard Rustin. It says, a decade has passed since I began considering the account this book sets forth. During that time, I've consulted with friends, colleagues, and housing specialists. These discussions have influenced my thinking and in some cases modified my arguments, but I've also encountered some objections that did not cause me to change my views. In what follows, I share many of those objections and my response to them. So this is one of those objections that did not change his views, and he gave his response to why he did not change his views. One of the objections was, why do you only talk about African Americans? Don't other minorities face discrimination as well? Don't Hispanics also live in segregated communities? Here is Mr. Rustin's answer. Now, I'm trying to tell you now, get ready, because as you can see, his answer going for like two and a half, 3 pages. He answers by saying, two distinct problems are easily confused. One, the subject of this book is the de jure, D-E space J-U-R-E, is the de jure segregation of African Americans that has yet to be remedied. The other is growing economic inequality, including housing prices and rent that are unaffordable in many middle-class communities to families of all races and ethnicities. Although our history includes government-organized discrimination and even segregation of other groups, including Hispanics, Chinese, and Japanese, it was to a lesser degree and is in the more distant past than the de jure segregation experienced by African Americans. First and second generation Hispanics, mostly Mexican but also from other Latin American countries, frequently live in ethnically homogeneous low-income communities, but for the most part, few have been segregated in those communities. forced to live there by private discrimination or by government policies designed to isolate them. Low-income immigrants have also lived for the first few generations in ethnic enclaves where their language is spoken, familiar foods are accessed, ethnic churches are nearby, and rent is relatively cheap for overcrowded apartments. This was the history of Irish, Jewish, Italian, Polish, Greek, and other migrant groups that came to the United States with few skills but was willing to work hard at low wages to achieve economic security and ensure better lives for their children. It could not have been it could, it could not have been otherwise. Unskilled and poorly educated immigrants could not easily survive if dispersed throughout a foreign, unfamiliar native population. In the third generation and beyond, descendants of immigrants typically have left ethnic neighborhoods and assimilated into the broader society. Assimilation does not mean losing a cultural identity, but the primary identity of these later generations have been as Americans. To a considerable extent, this pattern characterizes 20th century Hispanic immigrants as well. Data asperse that disaggregates results by immigration by immigrants' generation, but what little we have supports this conclusion. For example, in 2010, 26% of all Hispanic newlyweds married non-Hispanics. For those born here, the second and subsequent generations, the rate was 36%. For the third generation and beyond, the rate is likely to be 40% and perhaps more. But data for black families who have been Americans for centuries are quite different. Theirs is less than half the intermarriage rate of second generation Hispanics. Some studies conclude that Hispanics, and in particular Mexicans, educational and economic improvement stalls after the second generation, and that immigrants are now blending into the white middle class. These studies are flawed because they rely on surveys that ask respondents if they are white, African American, Hispanic, or Asian, or some other category. If third generation and beyond Hispanics rely, no, if third generation and beyond Hispanics reply that they are white, data on their education and income are not included in the Hispanic category. The most assimilated descendants of Mexican immigrants, those with the most education or highest income, or those who have married non-Hispanics, are most likely to cease identifying themselves as Hispanics, resulting in underestimates of the third generation and beyond assimilation. Mexican immigrants, Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans were also sometimes segregated de jure by government policy, brutalized by police, prohibited from entering white eating, retail, or entertainment establishments, and mistreated when they served in the armed forces. In some cases, especially in Texas, they were segregated in schools. Today, many low-income Hispanic youth living in communities of concentrated disadvantage have a toxic relationship with police that is similar to that of African American youth, and for many of the same reasons. Yet, horrific though our treatment of Mexican immigrants and Puerto Ricans have sometimes been, it is not comparable to our treatment of African Americans. In many communities, restrictive covenants prohibited sales not only to African Americans but also to Hispanics, and frequently to Jews, the Irish, Asians, and others deemed non-Caucasians. Yet judges often deem Mexican Americans to be Caucasians and not subject to exclusion by restrictive covenants. As the 20th century progressed, property and residency restrictions mostly faded away for all except African Americans. Only African Americans have been systematically and unconstitutionally segregated for such a long period and with such thorough repression that their condition requires an aggressive constitutional remedy. Only African Americans have been systematically and unconstitutionally segregated for such a long period and with such thorough repression that their condition requires an aggressive constitutional remedy. Read and vote. Now, this book was written in 2017. It came out, I think, yeah, it came out 2017. So, yeah, in the 10 years this man took, in the decade or so, it took this man to like research and write this book. This is the response he came with to that question. 10 years. So in the last 10 years, America had a black president. This is an awesome book, yo. This is a great book. But y'all gonna see why. We're gonna get to that. I love this answer so much. I had to throw it in here, you know what I mean? When I got to this part right here, I had to throw it in here. But certainly, Hispanics still suffer discrimination, some of it severe. Bilingual education programs smooth the transition to English for low-income immigrant children, but nativist-driven campaigns have severely restricted the use of this proven pedagogy. That's a good word. Pedagogy. Where's my dictionary at? Pedagogy. P-E-D-A. The principles and methods of instruction, the profession of a teacher, the activities of educating or instructing, activities that impart knowledge or skill. Okay. It says, certainly Hispanics still suffer discrimination, some of it severe. Bilingual education programs smooth the transition to English for low-income immigrant children, but nativist-driven campaigns have severely restricted the use of this proven system of teaching, pedagogy. Nearly 1 in 4 Hispanics seeking to buy or rent homes still meet with discrimination from real estate agents or landlords. In some cases, municipal officials target Hispanic immigrant households for selective building code enforcement. Under the eye of regulators, banks discriminatorily marketed subprime loans to Hispanics as well as to African American families. Although in many respects the experience of low-income immigrant Hispanics is similar to that of earlier European immigrant groups, those groups experienced periods of broadly shared prosperity. After European immigrants or their descendants returned as veterans from World War II, production and non-supervisory workers experienced a quarter century of wage growth at average of 2.3% a year, helping them to establish firm footing in the American middle class. Since 1973, there have been no wage growth whatsoever for production and non-supervisory workers. This trend, not unremedied de jure segregation, is what may prevent late 20th century immigrants from fully following in the path of those who came before. In metropolitan areas, many first and second generation Hispanics live in neighborhoods with high proportions of poor and low income families. Good social policies should facilitate their movement as soon as they are ready out of such low opportunity neighborhoods. The reforms needed to restrain the Section 8 and low-income housing tax credit programs from confining African Americans to high poverty and poorly resourced neighborhoods should do the same for recent Hispanic immigrants. Creating greater opportunity for low-income Hispanic immigrants is sound social policy. Creating greater opportunity for African Americans is sound social policy as well, but is also constitutionally required to remedy de jure segregation. A healthy American society requires both the segregation of African Americans and a more egalitarian, growth oriented economy to benefit all low income families. The Obama administration was about that. But no, they had to go make America great again. White bigots, 62 million a year who voted for this dumbass. De jure segregation and blocked economic opportunities are two distinct problems. We should address each one. Yeah, I just had to cut to that real quick. If anyone don't know about Stash, it's an app called Stash, like Stash. If you don't know about it, check it out. When I said that app is like that, it's like a little investment app kind of thing. But like yeah, they got a section where you can hold on, let me see. NFL. They got a section where you can where they send you articles about, they send you articles about certain topics, trying to advise on how to invest. They mostly invest in like mutual funds instead of just specific stocks themselves. They 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 kind of a nice little app. If my money was right, I can't say if I was white in America, I don't ever want to be. I love being black too much. I love being African too much, especially in America, but still, you know what I mean? Long story short though, this was sent to me on September the 4th of 2018, or it was published in is Stash Learn, is on their Money Talk edition. It says, "Go deep. Football is America's favorite sport and a money-making machine. The U.S. have a love affair with the pigskin, and it's a giant business. I love football. I love football. I've loved football since 2005. I'm gonna tell you exactly. It was a Monday night football game. The Redskins against the Cowboys. Mark Bunnell. The game ended up 14-13, if I remember correctly. I watched it at James' house. I had just got off for work from Marriott. I watched it at James' house, and yeah, I don't know if they went to overtime. Nah, it was just a straight, it's the regular game. The Skins were down though, and Mark Bunnell threw a pass, like threw a bomb to Santana Moss in the end zone. That was it. Skins won. I've been a Skins fan since, you know what I mean? That's when I really got into the sport, you know what I mean? But, so I digress. You still with me? The U.S. has a love affair with the pigskin, and it's a giant's business. The end of summer for most people generally means a few things: back to school sales, Labor Day barbecues, and putting the finishing touches on your fantasy football roster. And while not everyone is a football fan, it's arguably America's favorite sport. The National Football League, the NFL, or what I like to call it, the Negro Fleecing League. If you didn't understand that through my accent, I said the Negro Fleecing League. I said fleecing, like fleecing the sheep, like saying like Fleecing. There you go. The Negro Fleecing League. Okay. The NFL is viewed favorably by 57% of Americans, and 37% say it's their favorite sport to watch, far more than any other sport, according to recent survey data from Gallup. There's clearly demand for bone-crushing hits, pick six, and 60-yard field goal attempts among U.S. consumers. And they have a Gallup chart from 2017 that says football is favored by 37%, basketball by 11%, and baseball by 9%. And where there's demand, there's an opportunity to make money. And when it comes to football, there's an awful lot of it to be made. Football economics. Football's two primary economic engines in the United States are the NFL and college football, and the two generate billions in revenue. 14 billion, 13 total NFL revenue in 2017. 31.9 million average revenue per football team in 2018. 129 total as per 2018. So it's 129 total schools, each averaging 31.9 million. Can I go to my calculator, do the math real quick? 129 times 31, 9. Wow, that's about 4.1 billion. That's not bad money. That's not bad money at all, y'all. I ain't mad at y'all. Go ahead, NCAA. Enslave those boys. How football makes money. Billions of dollars flow through the football economy every year from sources including merchandising and endorsement deals. But the bulk is driven through sales of broadcasting rights. The complete financials for leagues like the NFL are private, but we do know some details regarding the NFL's media revenues. Fox Sports will pay the NFL $3 billion to broadcast Thursday Night Footballs for 5 years. Verizon will pay the NFL $1.5 billion to stream games to subscribers for 5 years. The NFL has TV broadcast contract with CBS, ESPN, Fox, and NBC that expires in 2022. College football is played between U.S. universities and colleges, with one exception. There are 777 schools around the country in various divisions that field football teams. The college game is played at 4 levels or divisions, the biggest and most popular being the Football Bowl Subdivision, FBS, under the National Collegiate Athletic Association, NCAA. College football players are technically amateurs. They aren't paid, and instead, most players are granted athletic scholarships and room and board by their college or universities. The university game generates massive revenues. All college sports combined, including basketball, baseball, and other sports, generated $1.6 billion in 2017, the most ever. Football is responsible for the majority of it. Then my math was wrong just now. I'm sorry, world. I tried. I can read, I can't do math, right? I'm sorry. College football works differently than the NFL, as groups of schools or conferences negotiate together for better deals. These are the average payouts for broadcasting rights per school in each of the Power 5 FBS conferences in 2017. SEC, $40.9 million. Big 10, $35 million. Big 12, $35 million. Pac-12, $29 million. ACC, $27 million. While these revenues come primarily from broadcasting rights, football groups also generate money from licensing deals, video games, sponsorships, and equipment agreements. For example, Nike inked a deal with the NFL to supply all on-field equipment to all 32 teams until 2028. The NFL is also partnering with sports merchandising company Fanatics to sell replica jerseys and gear in retail stores. College teams negotiate their own deals on a per school basis and they vary widely in revenue and they vary widely in value. I'm sorry. The most valuable current agreement between the UCLA and Under Armour nets the school nearly $30 million per year until 2032. Adding it all up, what does all of that revenue add up to? Valuable franchises. Here are the most valuable NFL teams in the league. Dallas Cowboys 4.8 billion. It has an asterisk next to it. What does that asterisk stand for? What does that asterisk stand for? Dallas Cowboys are considered the most valuable sports franchise worldwide. What up, Jerry? You racist pig. Get the fuck out of here. I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? I was thinking that I was not supposed to say that. But adding it all up, what does all that revenue add up to? Valuable franchises. Here are the most valuable NFL teams in the league according to Forbes. NFL team Dallas Cowboys 4.8 billion, New England Patriots 3.7 billion, Washington Redskins 3.1 billion, San Francisco 49ers 3.05 billion, Los Angeles Rams 3 billion. And here are the most valuable college football programs according to the Wall Street Journal. All right, these are the football programs now, not the entire sports, but that's pretty much at the bulk of it. You know what I mean? Ohio State, the Ohio State, OH. Gotcha. The Ohio State, man, 1.8 billion. Yo, some African countries ain't seen that much money in like half a century, yo. I ain't gonna lie. I ain't gonna lie to y'all, my niggas. I ain't gonna lie to y'all, man. Man, football though. Trying to tell you, yeah. Like, so imagine right now, so I was talking, let's say that so I was visiting my country right now, right? Like, so I'm in Freetown right now, and CNN is showing highlights from a college football championship game, and we're just talking about, they're asking me questions since I'm living in America, they asking me questions about, about this and that, and let's say I show them this, and I'm telling them, like, so Ohio State is worth like 1.5 billion. They'll be like, eh? Sammy, Salon no see that consider Salon no see that kind of money there like 10 years, bruh. 1.5 man, not 2 million or billion. Panda to it, knock yanda, kick yanda. Una ruffle. Sammy, try to tell you, like, what? Like, like a business, like I get it, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. So I don't get that they're greedy, but I get that man is greedy. I get it. They're men, they're businessmen, they're greedy. That's what's wrong with the world. Man's greed, not mankind's greed. Man, like us men, XY chromosome men. Man's greedy, you know what I mean? But I can get the Cowboys being worth 4.8 bill, the Patriots 3.7, the Skins 3.1, the Niners 3.05, you know what I mean? So the Rams 3, I can get all that. The Rams just moved, they got a new owner, new money coming, big money coming. I get all that. But Ohio State Buckeyes though, yeah, man. Mm. Okay, NCAA team, Ohio State, 1.5 bill. Texas, 1.2 bill. When in the heart of Texas, right? Oklahoma, 1 billion even. Alabama, 930 million. Louisiana State, 910 million. Now he goes on to say, while college football players while college football players don't get paid to play, the NFL has some of the world's highest paid athletes. When accounting for salary and endorsement deals, according to recent data from Forbes, Matt Ryan, he ain't making that much money a year. It says Matt Ryan, $67.3 million. Matthew Stafford, $59.5 million. Drew Brees, $42.9 million. Wow. The average NFL player earns 2.1 million per year, and the league minimum is $500,000 per year. The game has issues, however. While football has proven to be a moneymaker, the sport faces a slew of on and off the field issues. The NCAA, for example, has been criticized for earning hundreds of millions of dollars while players remain unpaid. And if there is a change to the existing model, college football as we know it may cease to exist. The NFL likewise is being dragged into political and dealing with recent revelations concerning the long-term effects of playing the game. Specifically, many former players develop brain damage, creating questions about how safe the game truly is. Despite the game's controversies, it continues to captivate millions of Americans. And if you're a football fan and want to get in on the action, you can put your money in the field of investing in the field by investing in companies that operate in and around the game on Stash. That was quite interesting. That was quite interesting.